Mexico. If you could spend half as much every month and live better, would you move? Well, by the time you're done with this travel documentary of Mexico, you are not going to be asking if you can afford to move to Mexico, but whether you can keep affording to not move there. But there is so much more to understand about moving to Mexico than understanding if it is affordable. Somewhere around 2 million Americans, 250,000 Canadians, and tens of thousands of Britons, Australians, Germans, and French have already done the arithmetic. They didn't move because Mexico is cheap, though it is. They moved because Mexico changed the equation, the one where your money, your time, your health, and your nervous system all exist in relation to each other. And in most developed nations, that equation has been quietly running against you for years. A successful transition to Mexico isn't just about finding a view you love. It's about solving the primary friction points that can stall a relocation. As we explore the various cities and areas, we will also address the knowledge that allows you to enjoy a more permanent relocation to Mexico. To make that move as seamless as possible for you, throughout the video, we will be giving you what we call insider tips for successful relocation. By the time you have finished this video, you will know all the most beautiful locations and how you can start living your life in this unique country. This is not a travel brochure. We're not going to waste time persuading you Mexico is paradise. Much of it is, but some of it is complicated, noisy, slow, and occasionally infuriating in ways that will require you to genuinely reconsider your relationship with punctuality. What we are going to do is give you the full picture, the numbers, the geography, the visa pathway, the honest safety conversation, the healthcare system, the cultural texture, and one amazing scientific finding from a validated research study that reframes this entire decision, revealing that this move to Mexico isn't just going to feel better. It will make you happier and healthier than you are now. Let's go. The first thing most Mexico guides get completely wrong is treating Mexico as a single destination. It isn't one place. It is 32 states, 11 climate zones, something in the range of 68 indigenous languages still spoken, and a cultural and geographic diversity that would embarrass most continents. When someone tells you they considered moving to Mexico but decided against it, the relevant follow-up question is, which Mexico? Because Mexico City and Mérida are not the same country. Oaxaca and Los Cabos share a flag and almost nothing else. The decision to move to Mexico is not a location choice. It is a life design decision, and the place you choose within Mexico will determine almost everything about what your life there actually becomes. So, geography first. Mexico City. 22 million people. Also, inexplicably, one of the most pleasant cities in the world to walk around in. This is not how cities of 22 million people are supposed to work. The neighborhoods of Condesa and Roma Norte are dense, walkable, green canopied, lined with cafes and serious restaurants and interesting bookstores and delicious brunch spots. The altitude, 2,240 meters, gives the city a temperate year-round climate that surprises most first-timers. Mexico City does not have seasons in the traditional sense. It has one long, pleasant season with a rainy afternoon period from June through September that most residents barely notice. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. The food scene is world-class in a way that is not hyperbole. The world's 50 best restaurants list has included Mexico City institutions for over a decade. And that ranking barely captures what's happening in the street taco stands and the family-run Commodores, where lunch for two costs less than a coffee in Manhattan. The cost of living in Mexico City varies enormously by neighborhood. In expat-heavy Condesa or Roma, a comfortable one-bedroom runs in the range of $700 to $1,000 a month. Go 10 minutes by metro, and those numbers drop by half. A comfortable expat life in Mexico City. Apartment, food, transport, entertainment, the occasional splurge, land somewhere in the range of $1,500 to $2,200 a month. Possibly less if you resist the temptation to live in a place that looks exactly like a hip neighborhood in Brooklyn, except it's in Mexico. Oaxaca. But Oaxaca is a different proposition entirely than Mexico City. Smaller, slower, more intimate, and arguably the food capital of a country that already takes food more seriously than almost anywhere on Earth. UNESCO recognized Mexican cuisine as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity in 2010, one of the very few national food traditions to receive that designation. Oaxaca is the center of that designation. The state is home to more than 60 varieties of maize corn, cultivated by indigenous communities over thousands of years. The mole negro, deep, dark, complex, bitter, and sweet and smoky simultaneously, takes days to prepare properly and has a flavor profile that defies description. You eat it at a market stall for a few dollars and spend the rest of the afternoon relishing the brilliance of the taste you experienced. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. The benefits offered to the remote entrepreneur and digital nomad via infrastructure in Oaxaca has grown substantially over the past decade. Fast fiber internet is available throughout the city center. Co-working spaces have multiplied. It's helpful to realize the comparative difference. The cost of living here is genuinely remarkable. A one-bedroom apartment in the historic center runs in the range of $350 to $600 a month. Groceries are inexpensive, and you can eat extremely well, very local, for almost nothing. Oaxaca is the Mexico that independent travelers discover and then find themselves unable to leave. Mérida. The capital of Yucatan, Mérida is consistently ranked, not just by expat bloggers but by independent surveys, as the safest large city in Mexico. Colonial architecture is so well preserved, it occasionally stops you mid-stride. The Central Plaza, the Paseo de Montejo, the carved facades of the old haciendas, Mérida has the kind of civic grandeur that makes you wonder how it isn't more famous than it is, and then you remember, it's hot. This is the honest caveat that every Mérida enthusiast eventually has to give you. The Yucatan Peninsula runs warm, in the range of 34 degrees Celsius or 98 degrees Fahrenheit, through the summer months with humidity that is not ambient but physical. You feel it. Some people adapt, some people do not. If you are someone who struggles in heat, this caveat is not minor. If you are someone who loves warmth and finds cold miserable, a group that includes most of the retirees who have made Mérida one of the fastest growing expat communities in Latin America, then Mérida is an extraordinary value. A couple can live very comfortably in Mérida for somewhere between $1,500 and $2,000 a month. 3-bedroom apartments in the historic center with colonial tile floors and interior courtyards run in the range of $550 to $850 a month. A full-service lifestyle with a housekeeper, and we'll return to what housekeeping means in Mexico, for well under $2,000 all in. A housekeeper 3 times a week is not a luxury in Mexico. It is simply what middle-class life looks like there. This will take some adjustment. Puerto Vallarta and Riviera Nayarit. Puerto Vallarta and the Riviera Nayarit coast give you the beach life with developed expat infrastructure. English is widely spoken. There are international schools, established medical facilities, and multiple direct flight routes to the US and Canada. Puerto Vallarta itself has been an expat destination for decades, which means it has the services, the social networks, the expat real estate market, and the occasional champagne Sunday brunch that characterizes mature expat communities anywhere in the world. North of Vallarta, the Riviera Nayarit stretches up through Sayulita and San Pancho, villages where the cobblestone streets run to the beach. The Sunday market is the social event of the week, and the pace of life is slow in a way that feels chosen rather than imposed. Sayulita in particular has attracted a younger, surf-forward crowd. It is charming. It is also increasingly expensive relative to the rest of Mexico, because charming villages that attract younger crowds tend to follow a predictable economic arc. San Miguel de Allende. San Miguel de Allende is the curated option. A UNESCO World Heritage City in the highlands of Guanajuato, with a 21st century attitude and a cultural calendar, including art galleries, jazz festivals, the famous Dia de Muertos celebrations, and culinary events. That would be impressive for a city 10 times its size. The expat community here is large, long-standing, and has developed the kind of organized social infrastructure, language exchange programs, volunteer networks, established arts organizations, that provides a recognizable entry point for new arrivals. The cost premium, though, is real. San Miguel sits notably above the national average for expat destinations in Mexico. A one-bedroom in a desirable neighborhood will run somewhat higher than Mérida or Oaxaca, and the services that cater to the expat market reflect that demographic. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. The honest safety note. San Miguel is located in Guanajuato State, and the state of Guanajuato has experienced elevated cartel activity over the past several years, primarily in cities to the north and west of San Miguel. The city itself has maintained a very low crime profile, and foreign national incidents are extremely rare. This is not a dismissal. Anyone moving to San Miguel should research current state-level conditions specifically, but the city's own safety record is clear. Los Cabos. Los Cabos is the high end, where the Baja California desert drops directly into the Sea of Cortez. The landscape is extraordinary, cactus and rock and deep blue water, and the resorts, the restaurants, the marina, and the real estate market exist at a price point that no longer surprises anyone who has tried to buy near a coastline anywhere in the world. This is still dramatically less expensive than Malibu or Martha's Vineyard. To help you understand the comparison, a house in a gated community with pool and desert and sea views comes at a price that would buy you a 2-bedroom apartment in the Marina del Rey neighborhood of Los Angeles. La Paz, a 2-hour drive north, gives you the same Baja landscape and Sea of Cortez access with a more authentic Mexican character and a substantially lower price point. The key insight across all of this: Mexico is not one decision. It is a menu of fundamentally different lives. The Mexico City intellectual who walks to 12 different restaurants before deciding who goes to the Contemporary Art Museum on Sunday and takes the metro everywhere is living a different life from the Oaxaca expat who wakes to church bells and spends Saturday morning at the weekly market. Both are living a different life from the Mérida retiree on the wide paseo at 6 in the evening in the cooling air, and from the Puerto Vallarta surfer remote worker who is in the water by 7 and answering emails by 10. You are not choosing Mexico. You are choosing which Mexico. Cost of living in Mexico. Now the numbers, because the numbers are where this conversation either changes your life or remains theoretical. Mexico's overall cost of living runs, by most independent indices, somewhere around 40% lower than the United States overall. Rent alone runs closer to 60% lower. Those are averages across the country. The expat-concentrated cities trend higher than the national average, but remain dramatically below comparable quality of life in any major U.S. or Canadian city. Here is the concrete illustration, and we're giving you ranges rather than a specific monthly figure because the direction of these numbers is more meaningful than any precise dollar amount at any given moment. A comfortable life in Mérida, 3-bedroom apartment in the historic center, 2 people, housekeeper 3 times a week, groceries, dining out regularly, transportation, entertainment, incidentals. Lands in the vicinity of $1,500 to $2,000 a month. A comparable life in Mexico City, in a desirable neighborhood, runs perhaps $1,500 to $2,200. Oaxaca runs somewhat lower. The beach towns, Puerto Vallarta, Sayulita, Cabo, run higher, but still dramatically below a comparable coastal lifestyle in California or British Columbia. That gap between your current cost of living and Mexican cost of living is not merely a savings figure. It is a transformation of your portfolio math. If you need $3,000 a month to live comfortably in Mexico instead of $6,000 to live equivalently in the place you are now, your retirement date just moved up by a decade. Your financial independence number just got cut in half. The money you have right now either already crosses the threshold or comes very close to it when the denominator is Mexico rather than wherever you currently are. This is not a minor adjustment in lifestyle planning. This is a structural shift. The way the FIRE community, financial independence, retire early, frames this math is useful here. The conventional rule of thumb says your portfolio needs to be 25 times your annual expenses to support indefinite withdrawal. Reduce your annual expenses by 40%, and you've just reduced the portfolio target by 40%. That eliminates years of continued saving. Or it is the difference between a portfolio that barely covers your current life and one that covers your Mexican life. With room. The same nest egg that feels insufficient in San Francisco or Vancouver or London starts to look very different when the denominator shifts. This is why Mexico is not an option of last resort for people who couldn't make it elsewhere. It is a deliberate efficiency, chosen by people who have done the arithmetic and found that the math, applied to Mexico, gets them to the life they actually want substantially sooner than the life they currently have would permit. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. The purchasing power of a US dollar, a Canadian dollar, a pound sterling, or a euro in Mexico has been a durable advantage over time, moving with exchange rates but consistently maintaining the expat's fundamental edge. No one can promise you the ratio stays constant. No number in any relocation video should be taken as a fixed guarantee. But the underlying dynamic, the gap between developed world earnings or savings and Mexican living costs, has persisted across decades and across multiple economic cycles. The direction of that advantage has not changed. Mexican visas. Now, the visa, which is simpler than you think and more navigable than most guides make it sound. Mexico's immigration system runs through the INM, Mexico's National Migration Institute, and it offers 2 primary legal pathways for long-term residents. The first is Residente Temporal, a temporary residency valid for up to 4 years, renewable, that allows you to live in Mexico legally without a work permit, though a separate process exists for those who want to work. The second is Residente Permanente, which has no expiration date and gives you most of the same rights as a Mexican national, including the ability to work without ever needing to renew. The practical process. You apply for Residente Temporal at a Mexican consulate in your home country before you move. This is the part most people overthink. You present financial documentation, proof of sufficient income or savings, and basic background materials, and if approved, you receive a visa that gives you 180 days to enter Mexico and complete the process with INM. Once in country, you go to your local INM office, present the documents, pay the fees, and receive your card within a few weeks. The card is valid for 1 year initially, and you renew it in person at INM for up to 4 years total. Financial thresholds you must meet for long-term visas in Mexico have moved upward in recent years. reflecting broader economic adjustments, and the current figures should always be verified directly with your specific consulate before applying. Background checks are required and standard. Americans submit to an FBI background check. Canadians go through the RCMP. Britons use the DBS. Australians go through the AFP. The process typically takes a few weeks, and the certificate needs to be apostilled, a standardized international notarization, before submission to the consulate. Once in Mexico, you will encounter two bureaucratic terms worth knowing before you encounter them in confusion. First, your CURP, Clave Única de Registro de Población, is your national ID number in Mexico, the identifier that ties your identity to the Mexican government system. It is assigned as part of your residency process, and you'll use it constantly. The second term, the Línea de Captura, is simply a payment reference number generated by INM for your fees. You take it to a bank and pay before your appointments. These are not obstacles. They are steps. They take time and occasionally require patience with the process, which is always more linear on paper than it is in the INM waiting room. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. Get a good immigration attorney. Fees run a few $100s, but it is worth every peso to help smooth the process. After 4 years of residente temporal, you can apply for permanent residence. At that stage, your financial documentation requirements reset. You do not need to meet the higher direct threshold. Your prior 4 years of residency qualify you. The process is again handled at INM. You surrender your temporal card. You receive a permanent card, and you now have indefinite legal residency in Mexico. Taxes in Mexico. The tax question requires a genuine professional, not a YouTube summary. 2 professionals specifically. First, an international tax advisor familiar with your home country's tax treaties with Mexico. Second, a Mexican contador, a licensed accountant who handles your Mexican tax obligations. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. Mexico has tax treaties with the United States, Canada, and the United Kingdom, among others, designed to prevent double taxation, but the application of those treaties to your specific situation, retirement income, investment income, rental income, employment income, varies in ways that matter enormously. Do not wing this. The cost of getting it wrong exceeds the cost of doing it correctly by many multiples. Banking in Mexico. Banking in Mexico as a foreign resident is worth understanding before you arrive. The main options for everyday banking are BBVA, the dominant retail bank, branches everywhere, with a decent mobile app, and Actinver, which some higher net worth expats prefer for investment accounts. That said, many expats rely primarily on international solutions. The Wise Card for day-to-day spending, which converts at near interbank rates with minimal fees, and the Charles Schwab debit card, which reimburses all ATM fees globally. These are not workarounds. They are genuinely the most efficient tools available. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. Some expats add a Mexican bank account over time for specific purposes, larger payments, local transfers, but many operate fully on international cards indefinitely, especially in the early years. Safety. When it comes to Mexico, this is the most consistently misleading conversation in travel media, which is saying something, because travel media sets a high bar for misleading conversations. The narrative you absorb from news coverage of Mexico is roughly this: Mexico is dangerous. The corrective to that narrative is not. Mexico is completely safe. The fact is, Mexico is a country of 130 million people with dramatically varying conditions across its geography. But the risks for foreign residents in major expat destinations is genuinely, measurably different from the overall national statistics. Here is the specific information that cuts through most of the noise. Based on the combination of roughly 28 million annual U.S. visitor arrivals and approximately 1 million U.S. expat residents in Mexico, the homicide rate for U.S. citizens in Mexico runs about 1 per half million. The national homicide rate for Mexico's general population runs around 125 per half million. That is a large gap. That is a more than 100-fold difference in reported events, reflecting two realities simultaneously. First, the cartels primarily target each other and the people involved in the drug trade. Second, incidents involving foreign nationals bring immediate international scrutiny and government pressure that cartels want to avoid. This is not spin. This is how the risk calculus actually works. The border zone is a separate conversation intentionally. The northern border states, Chihuahua, Sonora, Tamaulipas, Baja California, among others, account for a disproportionate share of every crime statistic involving foreign nationals. Tijuana and Ciudad Juarez together drove an outsized portion of those numbers. The risk profile of those areas is genuinely different from the expat destinations we are discussing. The media conflates this, which is how the misleading narrative gets constructed. In Mexico City, Oaxaca, Mérida, Puerto Vallarta, Querétaro, and Morelia, the recorded homicide rates for foreign nationals in recent data periods have included years of exactly 0 U.S. citizen deaths in some of these cities. That is an important fact that never makes the news. But it is the information you need to know and feel confident in. The cities with the lowest crime profiles for expats align almost exactly with the cities where expats actually live. States to approach with specific caution include Colima, which has maintained the highest per capita homicide rate in Mexico for multiple years; Sinaloa, where cartel dynamics have intensified in recent years following internal power conflicts; parts of Guerrero, outside the coastal tourist zones. This is not a complete list, and conditions change. Check the specific state advisories from the U.S. State Department for the current picture, but understand that those advisories are frequently broader than the granular reality on the ground and should be read in context. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success: the practical guidance for expat daily life. Don't do things that connect you to illicit activity of any kind. Don't flash wealth conspicuously in unfamiliar areas. Use registered taxis or rideshare apps rather than flagging from the street in cities where that distinction matters. And get to know your neighborhood before wandering beyond it. These are the same rules that apply to being sensible in any large city anywhere in the world. People who live in Mexico City and tell you it feels safer than many American cities of comparable size are not naive. They have been paying attention. A brief pause from the practical, because you need to remember why you want to move. 6 in the morning in Oaxaca. The city is not quiet. It is never completely quiet, but it runs at a lower frequency than whatever frequency you left behind. The bells of Santo Domingo begin at around 6, massive and resonant. And from the rooftop terrace where you've been sitting with coffee since before dawn, you can see the carved stone facade of the church caught in the early light. The market a block over is already moving. Vendors arranging stacks of fresh corn tortillas, the smoke from the tlayuda griddles already in the air, the scent of chocolate and chile arriving as something physical. A dog crosses the cobblestones. A woman walks by balancing a basket on her head. The sky above the Sierra Juarez is going from dark blue to pink. You have no place to be for another 3 hours. This is now your typical Tuesday morning. Healthcare. This is a subject that, for Americans especially, sits somewhere between anxiety and obsession. because the American healthcare system has made healthcare an existential financial concern in a way that most of the rest of the developed world finds genuinely difficult to understand. Mexico has a bifurcated system, public and private, with expats typically using both in different ways. The public system includes IMSS, Instituto Mexicano del Seguro Social, which allows foreign residents with legal residency status to enroll voluntarily, paying an annual fee that is structured by age. Someone in their 30s enrolls for roughly $300 to $400 a year. Someone in their 60s pays in the range of $1,000 to $1,200 a year. That annual premium covers comprehensive care, including specialist visits, surgeries, and medications. The trade-off is exactly what you'd expect from a universal public system: variable quality across facilities, waiting times that can stretch, and limited English language capacity. Many expats use IMSS as catastrophic coverage while paying out of pocket for routine private care. The private system in Mexico operates at a cost that most Americans encounter with a kind of disconnected disbelief. A general practitioner consultation in a private clinic runs somewhere between $3 to $25 US, depending on the city and the clinic. A specialist visit runs $40 to $60. A comprehensive lab panel, blood work, full metabolic panel, CBC, thyroid panel, typically under $60, often with same-day results. The Farmacia consultation model, where a qualified doctor sits in a small consultation room attached to a pharmacy, is available in almost every neighborhood and handles the vast majority of common health concerns quickly and inexpensively. Major procedures are more costly but remain dramatically below US levels. A hip replacement in a private Mexican hospital runs in the vicinity of $12,000, against a US uninsured cost in the range of $40,000 or above. Cardiac procedures, orthopedics, dental procedures. This is why medical tourism to Mexico generates billions of dollars annually, drawing patients not just from the US, but from Canada and Europe. The quality at top-tier private hospitals, Hospital Angeles in Mexico City, Hospital San Jose in Monterrey, Centro Médico ABC in Mexico City, is internationally accredited and genuinely excellent. These are not second-best options. They are first-rate facilities at dramatically different price points. Private health insurance from Mexican carriers, GNP, AXA, Allianz, Cigna, MetLife, runs substantially less than comparable US coverage. A healthy adult in their 40s pays something in the range of $2,200 to $3,000 a year for comprehensive Mexican private hospital coverage with a deductible. Someone in their early 60s might pay in the range of $4,000 to $4,500 a year. Against US health insurance premiums for the same demographics, the comparison is not subtle. These annual rates in Mexico are equivalent to often the just 2 or 3 months of coverage in the United States. Internet. This is the infrastructure concern that is legitimate and has a real answer. Major expat cities, Mexico City, Guadalajara, Mérida, Querétaro, San Miguel, Oaxaca, Puerto Vallarta, have fiber infrastructure that supports remote work reliably. Not everywhere is consistent, and power outages in some areas can interrupt connectivity briefly. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. The standard toolkit to adopt for internet connectivity is a primary fiber connection, plus a Telcel or AT&T SIM card for mobile data backup. Both networks have strong urban coverage. For remote properties outside major cities, Starlink has changed the conversation entirely. The satellite system now works in Mexico and has brought reliable internet to locations that previously had none. Psychological shift. Now here's the thing, almost no relocation video talks about honestly. The psychological shift. The most personal realities that face you when you relocate to a different country and culture. not the adjustment difficulties. We'll get to those. But the deeper issue, what it actually does to your nervous system to stop living in a system that charges you between $3,000 and $5,000 a month simply to maintain your current status before any actual living has occurred, before the travel, before the restaurant, before the thing you want that you've been putting off because you don't quite have enough cushion. There is a body of research replicated across decades that has been challenging the assumption that economic disadvantage produces poor health outcomes across the board. It is called the Hispanic health paradox, first formally described by researcher Kyriakos Markaitis in 1986. The finding is this: Hispanic Americans, specifically those with strong ties to Latin American cultural heritage, on average, live significantly longer than white Americans. This, despite lower average income, lower rates of health insurance, and higher rates of certain metabolic conditions. Life expectancy for Hispanic Americans runs approximately 2 to 3 years above the non-Hispanic white average. The paradox, when you dig into it, points towards specific mechanisms: diet patterns, social connection, what researchers describe as familismo, life within multi-generational family and community networks, and critically, lower chronic stress loads. The CDC has confirmed the basic finding. The NCHS has confirmed it. Markaitis' original paper has been cited more than 1,500 times by subsequent researchers. The effect is real. The mechanism that links chronic stress to biological aging is increasingly well documented. Cortisol, our primary stress hormone, when chronically elevated, suppresses immune function, accelerates inflammatory processes, and has been associated with shortened telomere length and accelerated epigenetic aging. UCLA researchers have developed epigenetic clocks, biochemical markers that estimate your biological age independently of your chronological age. And cumulative stress has been associated with faster biological aging as measured by these markers. Here is the upshot, stated plainly. When you substantively reduce the financial pressure that dominates the emotional state of most middle-class lives in developed nations, when you are no longer calculating whether you can afford to take your kid to the dentist, or whether this month's income will cover next month's expenses, or whether you can retire before your health deteriorates enough to make retirement pointless, something happens to your cortisol. Something happens to your sleep. Something happens to your immune system's ability to do the work it is supposed to be doing. The lifestyle conditions that appear to protect the Yucatan Maya and the Oaxacan villager and the tight-knit Mexican family from premature death are not primarily ethnic. They are structural. They are conditions of stress, social connection, food quality, and daily rhythm. And they are conditions that a foreign resident in Mexico can access to a meaningful degree once the financial arithmetic shifts enough to permit it. There is another piece of the relocation puzzle that doesn't get discussed enough in the relocation context. When you move to a country where the baseline cost of existence is lower, something changes in the way you use time. Not theoretically, viscerally. The weekend that was previously a recovery interval between work weeks becomes something else. The morning that was previously a routine, get up, get dressed, be productive, move along, unfolds differently. You start making decisions that have nothing to do with money because money is no longer the implicit veto on every option. You start asking the question you stopped asking somewhere around your mid-20s. What do I actually want to do today? The answer to that question, when it is no longer constrained by financial necessity, turns out to be more fun and far more interesting. For most people, it involves more time outside, more time with other people, more time eating things that were made that morning, less time in front of screens that are trying to sell you something. The research on well-being is consistent on these variables. You don't need Mexico to access them. But Mexico, for a specific type of person in a specific financial situation, removes the obstacles that were standing between you and them. Then there is convivencia. This is a word that doesn't translate well into English, but that matters more than most expats anticipate before they arrive. It means, roughly, coexistence, but it describes a social architecture that is fundamentally different from the entrenched, go-it-alone culture of most modern Western urban life that often results in the epidemic of isolation and loneliness being recognized by physicians and therapists. Mexican social life happens in public, on the plaza at 6 in the evening, at the shared table at the market on Sunday, at the neighborhood fiesta that closes the street for 2 days and involves everyone regardless of whether they were personally invited, because everyone is always personally invited, because the street is community, and community includes you. Expats who describe Mexico as having saved them are frequently describing convivencia, the specific texture of a life embedded in a place and a neighborhood, and a set of regular human encounters that do not require scheduling, that do not require an app, that simply happen because of proximity and shared space and a culture that values their occurrence. This is what the word arraigo means: rootedness, the value placed by Mexican culture on belonging to a specific place, on knowing and being known in a specific community. It is what most Westerners have lost in the transaction of urban modernity, and it is one of the things Mexico has in abundance. Expat bubble. There is a question worth addressing directly here. The expat bubble. It exists. In San Miguel de Allende, in the expat enclaves of Puerto Vallarta, in the Roma Norte coffee shop that could plausibly be in Melbourne or Portland, there's a version of expat life in Mexico that is essentially a developed world life at Mexican prices. The same conversations, the same cultural references, the same social circles, entirely in English, with excellent tacos nearby. For some people, this is exactly what they want, and there is no judgment in that. It is a perfectly valid choice, but it is worth being honest about what it is and what it isn't. If you move to Mexico and spend your time exclusively with other expats speaking English, you are using Mexico as a hollow platform rather than as a place. The financial benefits remain the same. The deeper benefits, the convivencia, the language, the cultural absorption, the arraigo, are missing. The people who look back on a decade in Mexico as genuinely transformative are almost always the people who immerse themselves in the joy of the culture. The food culture deserves its own acknowledgement. It is one of the UNESCO-recognized intangible cultural heritages of humanity. The complexity of Mexican cuisine, the 60-plus varieties of maize, the moles that take 40 ingredients and 3 days to craft, the regional variation that means the food in Oaxaca is as distinct from the food in Veracruz as Italian food is from French, is the product of civilizational continuity. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. The Aztec markets that Hernán Cortés described in 1519 as larger and more sophisticated than anything in Europe were not exaggerations. Mexican food culture is deep, and it is daily, and it is yours to engage with the moment you set foot in any Mexican city's market. Dia de los Muertos is also worth addressing directly because it is frequently described, especially in English language media, as a Mexican Halloween, which it is not. And the mischaracterization misses almost everything that makes it significant. It is a hybrid Catholic-indigenous synthesis observed over November 1st and 2nd, in which the dead are understood to return to visit the living. Families build ofrendas, altars decorated with marigolds, photographs, food and drink that the deceased loved, and candles to guide them home. In Oaxacan cemeteries, families gather overnight among the graves, eating and drinking and remembering together. It is not morbid. It is the opposite of morbid. It is one of the most alive things you will ever witness, and it articulates a relationship with mortality that is fundamentally less terrified than the relationship most modern Western cultures have managed to develop. The dead are not gone. They are just somewhere else, and for 2 nights in early November, the distance closes. Daily life. Saturday morning in the Mercado. You walk in from the street and the fragrance of smoke hits you first. Charcoal and dried chili and something faintly sweet. The copal incense from the vendor near the door. The corridor of meat stalls gives way to the cocineras, women presiding over enormous griddles, assembling tlayudas to order. The enormous leathery corn discs crisping and bending under the black bean paste and tasajo and white Oaxacan string cheese. You take a seat on a low stool at a communal table. The woman across from you is a grandmother. The man next to her is your age and checking his phone. The child at the end is eating chocolate and not apologizing for it. Nobody is looking at a menu. Nobody is performing their meal for social media. Everybody is simply savoring a fresh meal in a building that has been filled with this specific combination of smoke and sound and commerce for longer than most countries have even been countries. Language. Your experience of Mexico will be vastly better if you learn Spanish, and your ability to speak Spanish will improve faster in Mexico than almost anywhere else, because necessity is the most efficient teacher, and Mexico is full of people who will patiently and kindly tolerate your best efforts. That said, in the major expat cities, Mexico City, Mérida, San Miguel, Puerto Vallarta, Oaxaca, Los Cabos, English language services for banking, healthcare, and real estate are easily available. You will be able to function without Spanish, but you will be unable to truly access the full depth of the culture you moved thousands of kilometers to inhabit. Various services offer affordable one-on-one tutoring with native Mexican Spanish speakers, an hour of structured conversation practice for a fraction of what language schools charge. Here's an insider's tip for relocation success. 3 months of consistent practice before your arrival produces results that matter. 6 months of immersion after arrival produces fluency that is available to almost any adult who decides to prioritize it. The language wall that stops some expats is real, but it is also not as high as it seems from the outside. Your adjustment curve. Let's be realistic. You will have an adjustment curve. What we mean by that is something that every expat who stayed through it will describe the same way in retrospect. The first 1 to 3 months are often euphoric. The novelty, the discovery, the relief of escape from whatever you left, the delight at the food and the cost and the weather. Then, somewhere between 4 and 6 months in, something shifts. The novelty has worn, the bureaucratic friction, the mañana culture, the appointment that should take 40 minutes and takes 3 hours, the thing that was supposed to be ready last week and will be ready next week, the utility company that operates on timelines that appear to have no relationship with clock time, has accumulated into something that feels personal. But you must remember, it is not personal, it is structural. Mexico operates on a relationship with time that is fundamentally different from the one most Westerners have grown used to. And the gap is not a bug that will be corrected. It is a feature of the culture that you are not going to change, but that will change you if you give it the chance. The people who leave at the 6-month mark are not weaker than the ones who stay. They are simply less willing at that particular moment to let a culture be different from what they expected. The ones who stay discover something on the other side of the wall, a pace of life that, once you stop fighting it, becomes one of the primary reasons you moved in the first place. The urgency that you carried across borders starts to dissolve. Not the productivity, the urgency. They are not the same thing. Here the air is already warm, already fragrant with something flowering in the courtyard of the house next door. The pasteleria on the corner opens at 6, and the smell arrives before you see the lights. The main square, the Plaza Grande, has old men playing chess at tables under the trees, and a woman walking a small dog and a cyclist and the cathedral facade lit from below with warm light. You sit at one of the painted benches with a cortado and a pan dulce, and you have the specific sensation, rare in adult life, of being exactly where you are supposed to be. Not because anything dramatic has happened, because nothing is happening, and the nothing is full. What separates the ones who stay from the ones who leave is not income or language ability or even prior travel experience. It is a specific willingness to be a student of a place rather than a consumer of it, to ask questions rather than issue complaints, to find the absurdity of the government office waiting room genuinely funny rather than personally offensive. It is, in the end, an attitude of openness, the willingness to enjoy the new. And it is available to anyone willing to embrace it.